You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are that of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, Secular Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. How can I live in society if I don't believe in God? How can I understand the world around me without religion? What can I do to make the world a better place? Where did we come from? How can I be a moral person? These are just some of the profound questions we as humans have pondered for millennia. Join us as we ponder these questions free from the ideologies of religion and superstition. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about politics.
Sure.
Is everybody comfortable expressing their like general political thesis?
I certainly am.
Okay, I am as well, and I'm certainly open to what somebody may think is a fault in my thinking. Like I'm really interested in positive criticism and questioning the assumptions that I may have. So, like, I'm totally open to that.
That's awesome. Yeah, same here.
Okay.
So, who leans on what side of the spectrum? I mean, I'll start here. You know, I kind of lean more on the left side of the spectrum in terms of both economic and more social issues.
How far to the left do you lean? Like, is there too far to the left for you?
Definitely there is. I mean, when you start getting into, you know, oh, we're all the same, and when you start getting into, you know, crazy, like, communist type stuff, like, that's way too far for me. But I'm more of like Bernie Sanders left. Like, he represents my views fairly well, I believe.
Okay. That makes sense. I guess I know enough about Bernie Sanders that I could see where you stand then.
Mm-hmm. How about everyone else?
I grew up a conservative Christian. I also was a big fan of Ayn Rand for a while, which is very much to the right, like almost anarchist to the right.
Right.
Very libertarian.
Very libertarian, yes. So I would say I came from a libertarian side, which values I think, too much to an extreme, the rights of the individual, but not the rights of the individual must not usurp or impinge on the rights of somebody else. But other than that, like, that's the only government's job is to make sure that stays enforced, I guess. But should never be the first aggressor. So a man may break the law in his relationship with another man, but then the government steps in. It's never the government's job to, like, stop that from occurring. But anyway, so that would be where I started from, and I've moved my way over to the left. And I think that humanity is better when it works together on projects, like in numbers. We just tend to do more. We have a lot of social services now that are really beneficial to us, like roads and schools and stuff like that. But there's a certain point at which I don't think that we're capable as humans, or at least humans now, of managing it properly. So I'm not so sure we could have, like, for instance, universal college for everybody when we can't pay for things that we're spending or we're promising now. Like, to me, that's a big problem. So, like, I'm not sure if we're capable. We must be able to, like, fulfill our obligations, and I'm not so sure that we're able to do that now with what we have. So that's why I'm concerned about going further to the left. That's me.
Sure. I mean, you definitely don't want to become like a Greece, where we end up drowning in our own debt, because we overpromise things, and then we must deliver them.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
No.
I guess my problem is that sometimes Bernie goes a little too far left with certain things. Like I just saw an article that my wife posted, most notably talking about some of his views on GMOs, and that is something that I feel very strongly about because it's something I regularly teach my students about, as far as some of the facts regarding GMOs and how GMOs have far more research in support of their safety and efficacy than any organic food has ever had. And the fact that people are wanting labels for GMO foods is kind of funny, honestly, to me, because honestly, we already have a label for most of those foods, and it's called an FDA label, or it's called a U.S. Department of Agriculture label, because they've actually been inspected by some federal agency to assert their level of safety for consumption by the public. Whereas most organic foods do not have any label or any sort of governmental agency that has checked them and approved their nutritional value towards human. So
what's Bernie's stance on that particular topic?
So he actually believes that GMOs should be labeled.
Okay.
At the food market, and I am strongly against that because we already have labels.
Yeah. Is it enough?
Yeah, the problem with the labels becomes, well, if it's not bad, why do we have a label on it? And then it's like, how do you fight that? We only label things that are bad. So if it's got a label, it must be bad. And
right, and that's a problem, because honestly, when you start looking at the foods and how they're labeled and why they're labeled, you start to realize that, oh, well, there's differences in labels, right? So there's that label that says no trans fat, and yeah, that indicates it's a healthy food. But there's also that label that says FDA approved or whatever, and that actually indicates it's a healthy item.
Right. Well, and with some of these things, like, they may have removed one thing from it that seems to be bad on the surface, but you don't know what they replaced it with. Is a little bit of trans fat, better than like 50 grams of sugar? If they took 1 gram of trans fat out and put 20 grams of sugar, which is better? So yeah, no, I agree with you there. Like, if that's his stand, but I feel like on something like that, he may just be misinformed. Because one thing that I've noticed with him is that he's very pro-science. Like, he's, on the right side on global warming. He's on the right side of other science topics that I've heard. But yeah, I mean, see, that's the thing. It would be really hard, like, going back to kind of the political views, for me to find one politician that I agree with 100%. And I think it's probably true for everyone. I mean, I've been listening to a lot of talk radio recently, and just to hear what's the discussion on the right side, because I try to question my views fairly regularly, and there's a lot of different views, even on the right. I mean, there's probably, I'd say, more differences there than on the left side of the spectrum. I don't know. It's interesting. I've been finding out a lot of things on talk radio recently.
Yeah, Christopher, you seem to be fairly impassionate about this idea that you're talking about with the labeled foods and all that. Is it, like, how big of an issue is it for you? Is this just one of several issues, or is that like one of yours, like an overriding issue for you?
It's kind of a combination of issues, really. I think one of the contributing factors that I actually kind of want to talk about in my show is just the issue of people fearing things that they don't understand, and then kind of acting upon those fears in a way that is counterintuitive. So people hearing these words like genetically modified organisms, and then being like, "Oh, well, I'm anti-GMO," and it's like, do you even know what that really means?
Right.
And then they go on to say, well, yeah, it means there are more of these hormones injected into cows or salmon, and we're worried about those hormones getting into our, into our bodies and affecting our health. And I actually spent some time with a student this week just talking with them about this after class because they were legitimately concerned. They're like, well, what happens to those hormones once they're in your body? And it's like, you realize what happens to those hormones is the same thing that what happens to those hormones that are already in the body of those animals before we inject anything into them, right? So our body creates its own hormones. The cow's body creates its own hormones. The fish's body creates its own hormones. All we do is add more of those same hormones to their bodies to increase milk production, to increase the size of those animals so we get more muscle mass, so we can get more actual fish meat or cow meat out of it. So all those same hormones enter the same place. And they came from the same place. They all came from the cow, they all came from the fish. And so once they enter our digestive system, guess what happens to them? The same thing that happens to every other thing that enters our stomach. It gets broken down.
Right.
So all those hormones get broken down. All of the material that enters your stomach gets broken down.
Right.
It's not an issue.
Just through selective breeding, those levels of those hormones have changed over the years to be able to have, an 800-pound bull or a, 900-pound cow or, a chicken to grow from 0 to, however big in less than a year. So those levels we've increased through selective breeding. It's just that it's slower. It takes multiple generations where with, more targeted manipulation, it can happen faster. I don't know. Do they actually give extra hormones to the animals, like directly injecting them with like growth hormones and stuff?
Yeah, and actually that was one of a couple of the slides on my lecture this week, just to my students, and saying that when it comes to cows, we've resorted to genoming or sequencing the genome of a cow and figuring out what genes do what, and taking one of those genes that codes for the growth factor gene, inserting that gene into bacteria, and having those bacteria basically make massive amounts of this protein. And this protein is a hormone that acts to increase the growth of those cows. So then we harvest that protein from these bacteria, inject them back into the cows, and try to increase their growth rate, essentially. Right. So it all came from the cow's genome. We're just kind of ramping up production in these little bacterial factories, so to speak, and then inserting it back into the cow.
Yeah. See, a lot of these things also tend to run in fads. There was the whole antioxidants in the foods. And recently there's been a lot of articles being written about more and more evidence coming to light that actually all those antioxidants may not be that good for you if you go overboard on them. It has to do with how cancers develop and, all kinds of other things. So a lot of those kind of conventional wisdom type things, just like, hormones, they're growth hormones, they must be bad. They're oftentimes, I feel like, based on preliminary research, incomplete evidence, and stuff like that just you shouldn't put that much stock into. You shouldn't change your entire lifestyle based on something like that.
Well, and that's another great point, just because it, funny enough, occupies a slide or two in my lectures, just talking about the importance of antioxidants. I mean, it's definitely important to have it be a component of your diet,
Of course.
but for you to have your entire diet revolve around antioxidants, well, that starts to become a problem, because you literally have all these antioxidant molecules going through your bloodstream, neutralizing every single free radical that is in your body. And guess what? Your body uses a lot of free radicals to do the things that it wants to do and needs to do to protect itself from various things, whether that be bacterial infections. We have this molecule called nitric oxide. That is a free radical.
It was at this point the computer being used to record crashed. The show continues when we were all able to reconnect.
Okay, I'll just jump right back in. Christopher, do you think that Bernie Sanders is like a non-science based or is a science-based person? Like, you think, I always think that politicians must be confronted with something totally different when they're in the office of the president. Like, all of a sudden you're getting exposed to all this information that you had no access to before. You start to see why previous presidents did what they did. And then you're confronted with whether or not you're going to continue that or stop it or how to stop it. I mean, it's a huge ship, the United States. You can't just like slam your foot on the brakes, because, you know, people lose their jobs and, you know, all the politics involved with it. Like, as far as like morality, the idea of a man being moral, I really like Bernie Sanders, and I think that he probably would lean towards science-based information eventually. I mean, I wouldn't see him like saying like vaccines should be banned. Oh, that's a terrible example, but because vaccines are bad. He seems like a person who might actually look at the science of an issue before decreeing something or pushing for a particular agenda.
Yeah, and generally I would agree with that. He's definitely been very scientifically based and level-headed as far as a lot of the things that he brings up. It's just, I've definitely seen some things to where he sides a little too far left, a little too skeptical or a little too suspicious of certain things. I think I also recall seeing something on him being a little too skeptical of the promise of the NASA program, and maybe wanting to actually cut their funding in favor of other programs that focus more on people down here on Earth.
I gotcha.
And I don't necessarily agree with that, because the fact that we've already proven that NASA churns out about $10 into the economy for every $1 we invest in NASA. And so I really don't see the downside to investing money in NASA, especially since we only spend a paltry like $4 billion or something on NASA compared to a lot of the other programs that we spend a whole lot of money on and don't really get much payoff in the society.
I totally agree.
Is budget so small? Really?
Yeah.
I totally agree with you, Christopher. As I change in my political view, I want somebody. I mean, it is technology that has made humanity have the abundance that it has. Like, and that's not going to stop. We should be like pushing technology and science as hard as possible, because I think that's what's going to save more people. That's what's going to give more people abundance. At least that's my personal opinion. And I haven't really seen anybody who really is an advocate for that personally. But what are your thoughts, Beth?
Sorry, I was actually trying to look up the actual NASA budget, because it just that seems way too low for me. And it seems like for 2015, the NASA budget was actually $18 billion, according to Wikipedia.
Still, that's tiny.
Yeah, it's not much. It's not much.
Huh.
Yeah.
$4 trillion government budget. 18 billion goes to NASA. Like, I don't know. I think we should be. I'm sure there's probably all kinds of like military stuff that they're doing and learning things about where science is occurring, but it's occurring for the wrong reasons. I guess you could say. And don't they like throw a lot of money towards private in science research too, like with grants, that sort of stuff?
They do, yeah. And recently they've been trying to get Elon Musk's SpaceX and some of those other ones to try to ferry astronauts to the International Space Station, and so they're trying to branch out. I mean, a lot of the design work that NASA does is actually outsourced. It's not just they don't do all of it there. They do a lot of the sciencey stuff, but there's a lot of engineering that happens outside of NASA as a result of NASA. So, it's the bigger their budget, the better. If part of, I think, the economic boom that we had in like the 60s and the 70s, I think, was because we had these, rockets going to the moon and landings, and that partially inspired the generation to get into engineering, science, technology, all those fields. And of course, even if it didn't work for NASA, just having those kind of degrees generates prosperity in your economy. If you don't have a job for NASA, you start your own business or you work for someone else, and that's really driven technology forward.
Which candidate would you think is like the biggest advocate of scientific research? I don't know enough on that topic. It seems to me like Bernie could be the man for that.
Yeah, in terms of scientific research, I would think probably Bernie and Hillary are close. But I definitely wouldn't look for that on the right side just because of, I feel like they tend to politicize science a lot more with things like global warming. I mean, there was even some reports of, the science advisor for George Bush, trying to write some report, and, the political advisors going after that and just deleting sections of it or making him alter what was written in there. So I feel like science is a lot more politicized on the right, and that's one of my big problems with the right, is just that they put politics in front of even matters that should be settled science in some cases.
Yeah, it seems that way to me too. When I say I lean slightly to the right, that doesn't mean I like lean toward like Ted Cruz or even Donald Trump. Like I don't want to be affiliated with those people at all.
Well, you're probably talking, if I would understand you correctly, you're probably talking more on economic issues. You lean on the right as opposed to social issues. Am I understanding right?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the social issues, I think, always seem to change. They're fads with time. Like,
sure.
Nobody on the right is going to come up like endorsing slavery. But I think slavery was a product of the right at one point in time, wasn't it?
Actually, it was Democrats that were responsible for a lot of slavery.
Is it? Were Democrats like? Were Democrats and Republicans still
Democrats basically ruled the South until about 30 years ago.
That's really interesting. That slavery was
maybe 40 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how much you can compare politics, the right and left today, to like any right and left of the past. I mean, now leaning to the right is like, in a lot of ways, it's considered a more progressive point of view. Like, was the left of the Deep South back in the middle of the 1800s also progressive?
No, they weren't.
No, it is a very
social.
interesting scenario to look at, though, just from that perspective of, oh yeah, well, 100 years ago, the Democrats were essentially the people that are being hated on, but nowadays you see the complete opposite happening, and it's very interesting to see how those, like you said, those political parties have changed over time.
Yeah. Well, I also wondered too if there's like some core to the left, some core belief to the left, and some core belief to the right that has been universal throughout it, almost like a dichotomy between human beings and the way that they see the world. I don't know, maybe there's other ways to view it too, and it's not just a dichotomy. There's multiple ways of doing it, but in our country, it seems obvious that there's almost a dichotomy of the right and the left, and what makes the difference is how far to the right or how far to the left you lean. In countries where there's more political parties, are the politics just like totally different, or I don't know. I have no knowledge.
They can be. Where I come from, you have a parliament and a president. The president actually has a lot less power than the president here in the United States, and the person that has more executive power is the prime minister. But you also have multiple parties. So let's say a leftist party, wins not quite 50% of the vote. Let's say they win like 47% of the vote. They have to form a coalition with maybe a more centrist party. Usually they try to, make a deal with a small centrist party that pushes them just over the edge of the 50%. So they still have the influence, but you don't have to give up too much of the power. So it really makes for some very interesting dynamics. And, parties come and go. The parties that were around 20 years ago, only one of them is still around. Only the kind of Socialist Party is still around. All the other ones, if they even manage to get in parliament, they're down in single digits. So the two-party system versus the multi-party system that you see more in Europe is there's some very, very different dynamics that happen there. Very different. A lot of views are represented. There's middle grounds. There's different tugs, and sometimes even if you have a coalition with a small party, they don't have to always vote with your party. They can side with if you're on the left, they can side with the right sometimes.
V, you talk about them leaning to the left or to the right too, even in the multi-party system. When you say like the left or right, is their left or right comparable to our left and right too? Like, are they similar?
At least where I'm from, they are. The left being the more social,
okay.
Wanting more social type programs in terms of like unemployment benefits and those kind of things, and the right being the more individualistic type of worldview, I guess, if you want to call it. So yeah, and in some ways it's similar. I don't know how tax policies would compare to that, but I would imagine it's not. Some of the general views probably align.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as if you lean left, you're more liberal, and if you lean right, you're more conservative. It doesn't matter the party. In this country, Republicans are considered the right, and Democrats are considered the left. But in reality, if you look at individual politicians, they're across the spectrum.
Sure.
True, but when it comes to a vote, though, even though you may be across the spectrum, your own party can very easily, wring your hands and make you toe the party line. You jumping over to to side, say, with the Democrats in some vote, you're expending some serious political capital, and you do that a few too many times, and now you're just a marginalized politician waiting for your term to end because the party's not going to support you next time, and you're uh, you're a lame duck at that point in time. Where that siding left and right is much easier in a more multi-party system, where you maybe have like 4 parties in parliament, so easily some of the smaller players can shift around with some of the bigger players and get certain legislation passed or blocked, depending on their viewpoint,
Well,
without having to suffer much of political consequences.
well, you also too, even though you have a large spectrum and the large swath of the left to the right, you're all eventually voting on something up or down, yes or no.
Yeah.
So that's going to split that group somewhere, and I don't know if it's just the way they phrase things or the issues on which we choose to get political about it. We tend to be like right in the middle a lot of the time, 50-50. It may sway slightly, but it's never like 60-40, at least not in my lifetime. I haven't seen 60-40 in the political spectrum, at least for elections, in a long time, a national election, and ever in my life. Has anybody else seen that? I've heard of times where people win by landslides, like huge portions of the population, but I've never seen it happen.
I haven't seen it in my lifetime. And to another point, about this election, this primary election that's going on right now, it definitely seems like there's a lot of visible signs of the end of the two-party system in this country.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
With the corruption of not only the Republican GOP and the Democratic National Convention, it's visible because, I mean, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chair of the DNC, she's basically said had an interview where she said flat out that it's not about what the people want; it's about what the Democrats want, the Democratic National Convention wants.
Yeah, kind of the establishment Democrats. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually the same thing happened with the guy who's in charge of the RNC. He said practically the same exact thing. It's the way that Colorado turned out. Some of the delegates that went to the convention, the state convention for Trump, were refused at the door, and they were replaced with Cruz delegates.
Wow.
So he was basically, Cruz won Colorado by fraud, essentially.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so there are so many people supporting Trump and Bernie that I think that we're seeing the first visible signs of the end of the two-party system. I mean, it's
definitely interesting that the outsiders in both parties seem to be, gaining a lot of momentum, and are a lot stronger than anybody ever anticipated. I mean, Trump is winning on the right, and Bernie is not that much farther behind Hillary, even though in the beginning, he was polling like 50, 60 points behind.
Well, he's almost not that far behind in popular vote. As far as delegate count, Hillary has all the superdelegates, which are another DNC trick that they came up with. They just basically pull it out of their butts.
But they've screwed with Bernie in many different ways. There's been several little scandals that have added up to, this blatant, blocking that has been going on. Instead of, to me, like, the party should stay neutral and let the candidates run their campaigns and, let the people vote. Instead, they're, throwing their full weight behind their own establishment candidates. And, that really bugs me. That really bugs me because they're trying to manipulate the people into voting for who they want.
And that is happening on both sides.
Is it happening on both sides?
It is. Yeah.
I keep hearing it happening on, obviously on the Republican side, Trump and Cruz and what do they call it? A convention? What is it called?
split convention or
Yeah,
whatever.
Contested
enough
convention.
Contested,
That's what the RNC is hoping for, is that Trump doesn't get the 1,237 delegates required to secure the nomination. And so if he doesn't get the required number, it goes into contesting into a contested convention where you have more than one round of voting.
That's interesting.
So
but on the subsequent rounds, after the first one, the delegates are no longer bound to the candidate that they were sent there to vote for. So that's a major curveball in there.
Yeah, and that's what actually what the GOP is hoping for, is that the convention will be contested, and then the Trump delegates that are assigned to him can go vote for someone else, most likely Cruz.
Yeah,
I hear about that all the time, but is that also occurring on the left? Like, is the establishment on the left really against Bernie?
Look at the superdelegates. The superdelegates are the establishment, and they are pretty much 95% of them are voting for Hillary. So,
really?
So yeah, they've already declared their support of Hillary. So unless Bernie gets a ton more assigned delegates from the states, he's going to have, and I don't know if the superdelegates, the superdelegates honestly can sway the election.
Oh yeah,
just on their own.
Well, Bernie's roaring back. Hillary's got to be shaking in her boots.
Yes. Here's the funny thing, just to show you how much weight has been thrown behind Hillary. Today, national news was the fact that one single senator from the Democrats, said that he's backing Bernie Sanders. All other senators in the Democratic Party are currently backing Hillary. So if that doesn't show you how much weight is being thrown behind Hillary, and they've screwed with him in many different ways. At some point in time, they blocked him from. There was a failure in a system that they use, and both Hillary and Bernie were able to see each other's lists of voter lists, and that's not supposed to happen because they've built them up over time. But it was a failure of the company that runs this website, basically, in the database. And a guy on Bernie's side, uncovered it, and he, I don't know if inadvertently or deliberately accessed it, but not even an hour later, they were sounding the trumpets and saying, "Hey, look, there's a problem here. Let's fix this thing." And he got blocked from his own database of voters for several days. There's been other things that have happened. He had filed the paperwork in one of the states, I don't remember which one it was, to be on the ballot, but that paperwork was never processed, so he was off the ballot until somebody found out, and they said that they were going to fix it, and it was an honest mistake, and yada yada. But there, just all these little things just add up to all these roadblocks and all these things. Yeah, there's been a lot of hate towards Bernie.
A lot of hate. In I can't remember if it's Massachusetts or Maryland, one of those states. Bill Clinton was actually seen outside of one of the polling places. He gave a speech right outside, which you aren't supposed to be able to electioneer.
Yeah, that did happen too.
And he actually blocked traffic to where most supporters couldn't get in to vote. He blocked traffic for like half the day at one of the main polling locations.
Yeah, and there was one of the states. I want to say it was Arizona, but a lot of people couldn't vote because they had cut down the number of voting places, and there was long lines, and people were waiting for like 5 hours. So you don't even know what the results were.
Yeah, they went from 260 something, or like over 200 polling locations to like 60.
Yeah, and part of why that hurt Bernie is because he seems to kind of catch up to Hillary in the last few days of before the voting takes place in a given state. So people that have voted early more of them have voted for Hillary as opposed to people that vote that day. Much more of them vote for Bernie, so that skews again her way. So, and another reason why I'm actually not liking Hillary is I don't like these kind of dynasties. You know, we have the Bushes, we have the Clintons. I mean, come on, enough with that. We have enough smart people that we don't need dynasties.
Andrew, you talk about the two-party system possibly breaking up, which I agree with you. Do you see anything, like, what do you see coming possibly?
There's a good possibility that if Trump gets cheated out of the... I mean, he's well in a lead. The popular vote is definitely on his side right now. If it were to go to... If it were completely to popular vote, he would be the candidate, the Republican candidate. They're just... At this point, there's probably no doubts about that. He's so far ahead. Anyway, but if they go to contested convention and he doesn't get it, even though he won the popular vote, I think that would create such a schism in the Republican Party. And similar thing goes with Bernie too. It's just a lot of Democrats aren't so vocal about it. A lot of left-leaning people aren't so vocal about it as the right-leaning Trump supporters. But and Trump himself has said he backed out of that pledge to that he wouldn't run third party. He just completely disavowed that he said that, you know, his words on that. And I think he'll just basically create his own party.
I wouldn't be surprised if, the Tea Partiers kind of break off from the Republicans and maybe they form their own. Hey, I'd welcome more parties.
I would too, honestly. 'Cause, we have technically three parties. Independent, which actually Gary Johnson. I think that's
parties out there.
I think Gary Johnson is. I know he's running independent. I'm not sure if he represents a fledgling party or not.
He's running in the Libertarian Party. I have no idea.
Gary Johnson is a libertarian.
Okay.
Also running is John. Is it John McAfee? The guy who invented McAfee antivirus.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
The crazy billionaire. He actually plays the part of the crazy billionaire quite well. But he's actually running for president for an independent ticket.
Wow. Well, it's good to have some independents there in the mix.
Well, there's like the Constitution Party and there's the Green Party and there's other parties.
Yeah, there's a lot of fledgling parties that aren't really taken seriously, and then they have to have an independent candidate essentially.
Yeah, but the way the rules are set up, it's very, it's not possible for a third party to get in Congress, basically, because with the way it's set up, you're able to squeeze in a few, independents here and there, but man, to squeeze in a whole new party, you'd have to put some real serious effort there.
Yeah, well, on the national when the candidates are chosen for each party, and then it goes on to the national elections, to get into the debates there, because at that point it's actually federal. There's no more DNC, RNC bullcrap. It's actually federal rules. And at that point, you have to have a certain percentage in order to get in. And Gary Johnson actually ran when it was Obama and Romney.
Okay.
And he almost got it. He almost got enough support to get into that, to get into the debates.
Wow.
And he has actually more support this year than he did last time. So it's possible that we could see a third candidate in the debates.
It's possible. I doubt it.
I doubt it too. Unless of course Trump runs third party.
There you go.
And then he definitely has the support. And
well, but how would that work out if you have three candidates and let's say each one of them, one wins 20%, one wins 30%, and one wins 40%, what happens?
The 40% would
That's
win.
a really good.
It's whoever has more.
Okay.
That's actually kind of a problem with our system. That I remember watching a video explaining how it would work a long time ago, and I can't quite remember how they proposed to fix it.
Well, I'll tell you how it works back home. Where there's been on several occasions, at least one that I remember that I was old enough to remember. There was what was called the Democratic Party, there was the Socialist Party, and something called the Business Bloc. And each one of those parties, threw their own candidates. So there was 3 that were running, and on the first round of voting, nobody won more than 51% or 50%. So what they did was they took the top 2 candidates and they had a second round of voting, like a couple of weeks later, and then you with 2 candidates, you're guaranteed that somebody's going to win more than 51%. So at that point in time, you have a guaranteed winner, but that's so they did 2 rounds of voting. But if on the first round, somebody had won 51%, there wouldn't have been any need for a second round.
I don't think they do that here.
Yeah, that would be crazy here. I don't think that can happen here.
Well, I don't even think you need to.
I think they'd have to dust off some really old rule books to see how that would play out.
That's right.
Well, I mean, now you mention rules, just to see how corrupt the process is on the Republican side. Not that it's not on the Democratic side, but there are certain rules by which they vote that are very fluid. Like, they're not even decided. I think some of the rules are not even decided until the last moment before they actually vote on what the candidates are going to be, or like vote for the different candidates.
Right. That's because they instated a rule basically to keep Ron Paul out of the convention, and then
Last time,
the last election, the last election that Ron Paul participated in, and then they removed that rule to protect their favorite candidates from Trump, because I think the rule was you had to have at least 12 states majority, and the only person who had that at that point was Trump. All the other candidates didn't have that, including Cruz. So, yeah, it would have been Trump. By their own rules, it would have been Trump all the way. So they had to get rid of that rule.
If because if you have 2 or 3 candidates that they're voting for, it's easier to block Trump from winning on the first ballot. Because otherwise, let's say you made it so that Cruz and Trump are the only 2. Mm-hmm. On the first ballot, you're almost guaranteed that one of them is going to win more than half. But if you now have 3 in the mix, now you're not guaranteed. You're not spreading the votes of the third candidate to the other 2, so it's harder for one to win more than 51% on the first round. So they're manipulating these things a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just crazy. I wish those kind of things, only happened in other, underdeveloped countries, but I guess a little bit of corruption happens everywhere.
Would any of you guys, if you were given the choice in our imaginary world here, to be president for the day or a week or whatever, for any amount of time, would you take it?
At my age and my current knowledge, understanding of the world and all that,
Hey, if I get the retirement
and just
benefits,
the way
yes.
I work, I wouldn't, because see, to me, being president isn't always about being the smartest guy or anything like that. I mean, sometimes it's about being able to smack people around and boss them around to get the job done, and to be able to take decisions fast without all the information and all that. So I don't think that currently I'd be a good president.
Anybody, I wouldn't do it. Hell no. I want the smartest guy in the world doing it. Not me.
Well, since I tend to believe I'm one of the smartest people around, I wouldn't have a problem doing it. But that's just my ego talking there. So
I'd vote for you. The rest part. I'd vote for you to be in office for 2 minutes.
I love it.
Putin doesn't call you or anything like that.
What do
you want us to do, Mr. President?
That's why I'd have to bring my wife along, because she helps filter me and help me actually be personable in situations. So have to have her.
Of business, you hop on Air Force One and let's go to some island somewhere.
Well, we all say that we want somebody smart to be the president, and we have basically 4 options up there currently. Like, I don't know. It seems like the smartest person probably would be Hillary.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. I bet you she's. I mean, you've got. Not only do you have, she's an intelligent woman. She's not dumb, and she also knows her way around politics very well. So, like, who has that kind of exposure?
She's what I call clever. She's clever.
Yeah.
To where she does have some intelligence, she does have some knowledge, she does have some wit and skill with interacting with people, some level of charisma. So I'd call her clever. Yeah.
Well, I think
what's her agenda?
Have much more experience. I think Bernie he's been a mayor. Wasn't he a governor as well?
No.
He wasn't governor.
No, just mayor and senator.
He's been senator for a long time. He was part of the civil rights movement, so he's been in politics a long time. I mean, he hasn't been Secretary of State or anything, but
no, he's been involved in politics and other things outside of the normal system. He's been an activist and everything like that, which I appreciate, and I understand that's where he comes from. As far as just straight up political experience, Hillary does have that, but also she has a lot of controversy around her stay in office and as Secretary of State, and even as First Lady, there's a lot of controversy around her.
Does she have an agenda? Like, I don't know what her agenda is. Is that a lack of me not looking hard enough? Like, Bernie has an obvious agenda. Does Hillary have a vision for this country? Does anybody know that answer to that question? I mean, I would say no. At least from my fairly sheltered exposure of it all, I have not heard any real vision come from her camp.
I've kind of gotten the same feeling as far as her view being very amorphous, so to speak. Very, very difficult to nail down. Yeah,
I would think that with her knowledge and experience, she might be the most likely person to be able to get something done that needs to change. But I'm not hearing anything that she wants to do.
I totally agree with you. I feel like I don't feel the passion. I don't feel the leadership and all that. And all I see from her is, constantly moving farther and farther to the left because, Bernie is pulling the debate in that direction. So I don't know, with her, I almost feel like she'll say anything to get an office kind of thing. And that really rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that. She definitely, it seems like she just takes anything. It's like, okay, you want this? Fine, I'll say that. But her actions behind the scenes don't reflect what she's saying out loud.
Yeah. And what really bugged me a few weeks ago, or not even a week ago, was she had this private fundraiser event, and they literally turned on a white noise machine so people outside and journalists couldn't listen in on the conversation. I mean, if that's not low, if that's not corrupt, if that doesn't raise red flags,
Yeah, and she's fought against, like, there's this push for her to release, because she got $200,000 from Goldman Sachs for like 20-minute speeches, and there's been calls for her to release transcripts from that, and she's fought that tooth and nail. She's outright refused to release transcripts of those, and that just seems like, and she says herself that she's probably one of the most transparent politicians ever. Bullcrap.
Oh, nonsense.
Well, okay, so it seems like almost everybody in this group here can't imagine voting for Hillary. Is that true?
If it comes down to it, I'll just vote for third party. I mean...
Yeah. What about Trump? What about Trump? Like, he's obviously striking a chord for a lot of people. I like the idea that he's like a businessman and could potentially do... Like, economics is huge for me personally. I feel like what they're doing with the finances in this country is, like, ridiculous. Like, why are we doing that? We're playing with civilization itself.
Trump's strong point is business and economics. If he doesn't have the experience, I'm sure he'll hire someone who does to advise him or just to run something. That's just what a good businessman does. And what he is saying, that because this country has lost a lot of jobs to open trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, and upcoming TTIP and TTP, TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and TTIP is the other side of the Atlantic Ocean side of it. And those two are coming up, and not everyone wants it because we've lost so many jobs to NAFTA and CAFTA that it's just kind of it irritates people. The idea of losing more jobs and having less industry here in the United States, it rubs people the wrong way, and Donald Trump is against those trade agreements. He wants to bring jobs back into America, and I can see the appeal of that. I really can.
I really like that about him too, but I feel like he's very nationalistic, and I think that that's dangerous in the world today. Like the internet and the connectivity we have, like, look, we are heading toward a one world government eventually. Like, how can we not? Like, if we all have these different ideas about how we can, like, relate to the world, I mean, we're just going to end up trashing the thing in hundreds of years. Like, we're eventually going to need to regulate ourselves as a whole, as a world.
But we're not ready.
So I don't know
what
what
some politicians are trying to rush us into that, thinking everything will be fine. But honestly, I don't think we're ready. Humans as a whole are ready for that. We just have too many different cultures, too many differing opinions about things. Just look at the European Union and the way that it's falling apart now, essentially, with Greece being supported by all the other wealthier countries, and they're going into bankruptcy, and then there's another couple of countries over there that are in a similar situation, and
Great Britain's on the verge to exit.
Yeah, Great Britain's they're going to have the Brexit vote coming up. That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and Secular Fort Wayne on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.